Hi, so as promised, this is my review of the movie Dunkirk. I saw it on Thursday when it just came out, and you should go see this movie. Yeah, like go. As usual, spoilers. I am gonna talk about some of what actually happens in the movie, so if you don't want to be spoiled, so you just go away, like turn off this video right now. So at this point, I have to say that Christopher Nolan is my favorite director, if I have to choose one, because so far I haven't really seen a filmmaker who's, like even anything close being perfect or near perfect at everything that they do in terms of consistency, but Christopher Nolan has that consistency. So none of his movie I've seen are just really bad. Um, and this one is really it really fits very well to his trope, really. So the rest of what he's doing, it fits well with his style, and the way that he focused on the subject, the way that he approached the subject, is also very smart, and I'll get into why. So, for those of you who don't know, this is a movie. It's a war movie. It's set in World War II, and it's about the Dunkirk evacuation. Basically, the Germans have taken over France, and they pushed the Allied army, mostly consist of the British and the French, to the Dunkirk beach. And the British government decided to evacuate, mainly just the British soldiers. They also eventually managed to get some French soldiers out too, but their goal was to get most of the British soldiers out. And there might be some of you out there who really would like to see a more balanced movie on the German side as well, because there's a lot of controversy regarding this Dunkirk evacuation. Basically, why didn't the Germans just go and kill everybody on the beach? Because they had every means to. There's some debate about maybe they didn't do it because they didn't want to waste their artillery. There's some argument about maybe they didn't do it because they didn't see the need to do it, because they just thought that they won the war, they conquered France, and that's it. Other people have suggested that actually the Germans weren't, for lack of better word, they weren't that bad. Like, they didn't want to kill everybody. Because, during World War II, the Germans have always been seen in Europe, in the West, as like the devils. They did the Holocaust and everything. They also had forced labors on the part of like the Poles and things like that. There are some debates about there are certain ethnic groups in Europe that the Germans weren't so antagonistic towards. So the British and the French may be one of those. So that may be one of the reasons why they didn't end up killing everybody, just because they kind of didn't want to. So that's also one of the argument. In this movie, however, it's pretty much just focused exclusively on the British the British point of view. So if you have a problem with that they're not actually showing any German point of view. In fact, you don't even see really any German. There are no German characters. There are no German protagonist or anything. If you have a problem with that, you probably will not like this movie. What this movie really achieved is some form of realism with surrealism. That's the weird part, and that's pretty much a thing with Christopher Nolan's movie. He does a lot of sci-fi movie, but even in those, he wants to approach the subject with certain degrees of realism, to certain degrees of something that's fundamentally human, and that's what I really appreciate. So if you compare him to the other some of the other high profile directors, and I can think of two that it's kind of comparable to him in some way. One is Steven Spielberg, who also did a lot of sci-fi movies. Steven Spielberg, it's kind of like a really big people person. Like, he really liked to dramatize the people in his movie. But Steven Spielberg isn't really good with other types of movies. For example, I thought his Lincoln was really, really bad. Um, and Peter Jackson is another one, and Peter Jackson is like the opposite. He's the one who likes to make really grand CGI loaded movies with just really black and white characters, really non-complex, simple characters. I think James Cameron also fits in that category. So just really grand action adventure movies, and the people are just sort of like pawns on a chessboard. Nothing really much to them, but they're just all part of the world that he created. Christopher Nolan is somewhere in between, and he's like kind of a nice mix of the two. Like he makes scientific, sci-fi movies, he makes action adventure movies populated by people like subjects, but then it's about the people. That's something I really like about him. So he, on the surface of it, it looks like he's kind of like James Cameron or Peter Jackson, and he just makes a movie and he populates these characters, and these characters each don't really have much time in terms of you getting to know them. Not like Steven Spielberg, where he has like characters you really get to know, they have a background story and all that stuff, and he try to make you care about them. Christopher Nolan's characters are just really just there. Like, doesn't need to have a lot of complexity to them. But somehow he still manages to bring out the humanity, he manages to make you care about them. He manages to still make the movie that's a weird board game populated by subject about people. And this movie is no different. This movie actually, he really showed his talent in that, because in Dunkirk you really don't get to know any of these characters. They're just there. They barely have any dialogue. The dialogues are nothing really complex, unlike most of the other Christopher Nolan movies where there's a philosophy kind of aspect. This one, there's a philosophy, but it's more shown than from the dialogues. So the first thing that you need to know about this movie is that it's told in a non-linear perspective, which can get kind of confusing, and there are people who don't like it. I thought it was fine, but I didn't think it was anything really special from that perspective. I just thought that it really worked well in terms of showing off his skill of cinematography, showing how he could piece all those things together beautifully. But it's not something that's really, I would say, really, really necessary in making this a good movie. What is really nice about this movie is that the people in there, you would think like this is a movie with a lot of heroes, kind of like Pearl Harbor. It's kind of similar because they're on a beach and they are getting bombed, right? I mean, the Germans just didn't they just didn't bring out the artillery enough to kill everybody, even though they could. But they did have bombings going on in once in a while on that beach. But so you would think like it's gonna be like a Pearl Harbor kind of movie where you have, let's say, 2 or 3 heroes and they manage to save a bunch of people and they're awesome at kicking Germans' ass. No, actually, the characters in this movie, it's shown to a degree of realism that they do anything they can to survive. That's what's really nice about it. And many times that means really moral things. And in this movie, there are really just 2 heroes, quote unquote. One is the guy, the boatman who went against orders and took his boat to save the soldiers instead of giving up his boat to the army. The other guy is obviously the RAF, the Spitfire pilot, Farrier, played by Tom Hardy. And he's in the sky, and arguably he's the biggest hero in the movie because he's the one who shot down the most German planes to make sure that there are no additional bombing going on. He's the one who circles around in the sky to protect the Allied forces down below. But he's not the main protagonist. The main protagonist is this newcomer played by Finn Whitehead, and he managed to survive, and pretty much all throughout movie, he and some of the other 2 other major characters, it's about their journey for survival, and almost the entire time they have done things that are you could say, strictly speaking, it's not the most ethical thing to do. So the first thing they tried was finding somebody who's wounded and try to carry them as if they were ordered to carry the wounded onto a boat so they could get on the boat. That was the first thing that they attempted. And then after that, there's some bunch of other things, like they hid down in somewhere so they could get access to the boats. Just things like that. Like they tried whatever they can to be able to get onto a safe boat so they could go home. So they're not heroes. They're more like anti-heroes. Now, here's the thing that's really beautiful about this movie that really makes you really emotional, which is the irony in this movie. It's kind of similar. I would say it's kind of similar to in the Red Pill movie, if you guys have seen the Red Pill movie, in the end where you have a montage of the Boko Haram's atrocities, and it's shown that they killed so many men and nobody notices, but then finally they kidnapped the girls, and then you see like this whole big wall of bring back our girls, and it really makes you tear up because it's like a mixed emotion of shock and anger and also just sadness and just the irony just so hits you in the face and you just cannot break away from it. There's a similar moment in the movie, which is towards the end when they finally got home and everybody vetted them as heroes. They even said, if you manage to survive, that's enough, you're a hero. And then there's also a guy on the boatman, and he's like a friend of the boatman's son, and he was also printed on the newspaper as a hero, even though he really didn't do anything. I mean, he got himself killed. He just, tried to do some little thing and he got himself killed. Nothing really considered to be heroic, but he was part of the mission, and he showed his face, and that's how his name his face and name managed to be printed on paper as a hero. And the really ironic thing was the real hero, the RAF, the Tom Hardy character, he was the one that got captured by the German force. I mean, he's probably, likely to die in a prison of war camp, and nobody remembers him. Probably nobody will remember him, and they're probably going to remember, oh, there was an RAF in the sky and they helped us, but nobody knows his face or just anything, and he's the one who didn't get the deserved reward. And and you can see the parallel, right? Like on one scene, the boys who made it home are vetted as heroes, and they don't feel like they're heroes because they did so many immoral things just to survive. They just made it. They're lucky. And then you see the scene with Tom Hardy, and he landed on that beach and he had to destroy his own plane. The Germans came and there's nobody else on the beach, right? And he just got taken away. And that's the irony of the whole situation, and it's really beautifully played out. So yeah, I mean, other than that, I would say the cinematography is really beautiful. It's been filmed in the real place, and some of the boats apparently were the boats that took part in the rescue mission. I think the thing is that I think the reviewers, they're trying to make it about like a movie about, oh, we'll never surrender, we'll fight another day, but I don't think that's what the movie is about. I think really it's a movie about the human condition. Again, it's a kind of a action movie, kind of a war movie, populated by people once again, because you don't get to know any of these people really. You don't know their background, you don't really know anything about them, about people, because in the end, even though they only had a few screen time, and sometimes it's even difficult to tell who's who, that's how little screen time they have, and in this movie, not a lot of, I would say, complex acting skill is required. Like, for example, Tom Hardy, we all know that he's a really great actor. He can play many different roles, but he's really just in the plane, flying the plane. Like, he doesn't need to display much of any emotion other than just like really concentrating emotion. And even the main character, Tommy, I think that's what his name is, played by Fionn Whitehead, even him, uh, there's not much dialogue. I mean, it's really, it's the character is it seems almost one dimensional. But despite all of this, you start to really care about the characters. You start to really sympathize with them and also sort of suffer the irony that they feel, suffer the irony of the whole situation about what is a hero, what is an anti-hero, and how much we don't know, like how much uh, people that we might have missed and who have probably gone out of our memory, who are the actual heroes. Like I think that's the big question in war. And also, Christopher Nolan, like he said himself, always a feature. There's always something about time in his movies, and this one's also about like time running out and things like that. But I think really the underlying philosophy is like who's the hero and who's the anti-hero. I think that really is also kind of a reoccurring theme in a lot of his movies. So all in all, a really great movie. This is also a really short one too. It's only an hour and 40 minutes. But I would say this is a great accomplishment for a war movie. I didn't actually have this high of an expectation, just because again, Dunkirk, it is a controversial topic regarding what really happened. And also, like, typically I'm not a huge fan of war movies just because there's all these biases, and generally I don't really like watching people die horribly. So, but this one really, I would say, I would remember it for a very long time. So, you definitely should go see it. There's a lot of things to discuss, to make discussions about regarding this movie. And I congratulate Christopher Nolan, and I hope he keep making great movies like this. Yeah, I look forward to his next movie.